Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, rather. Thank you for joining us today. Today we are joined by the Hollie Gazzard Trust, who are going to be speaking to us about when does an angry or disgruntled client become dangerous, which should hopefully help you in all of your day-to-day jobs. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get through as many as possible at the end of the session. The webinar is being recorded today and will be available to watch back via the News on the Block YouTube channel. Just a quick disclaimer, some of the subjects that are being discussed today may be quite sensitive or triggering for some people. So if there is anything that you're not comfortable with throughout the webinar, please do feel free to step away. And if there's anything you'd like to discuss with us afterwards, we'll be happy to hear from you. Otherwise, that is all from me. I am now going to hand you over to the lovely Jane Harvey, who is going to be presenting to you today, and I'll be back later. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you so much, Vicky. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to have your company this afternoon, and we are going to whip through lots of subjects in the webinar. Let me tell you first a little bit about Hollie Gazzard Trust. So my name is Jane Harvey, and I am now the proud CEO of the charity. The charity was founded in 2014 following the murder of Hollie. There's a picture of her here. So she was just 20. She got into a relationship that was controlling and abusive and tried to end it. And when she did finally manage to end it after being subjected to controlling and abusive behaviour and physical violence, there was a brief period where her ex-partner stalked her, and then he walked into the hair salon where she was working and he killed her. So her family wanted the learning that had arisen from the entire case to be passed on. They didn't want Hollie's death to be in vain. And so primarily her dad, Nick Gazzard, he set up the charity to educate young people and their families about the warning signs, things that he wished that their family had known. And he started going into schools, colleges and universities to speak to young people there. The charity also collaborated on a safety app, Hollie Guard Extra, which I'll be talking to you about in the webinar as well. And through that, we aim to protect people whilst they're at work. So the charity has two main aims, really: preventing harm and protecting people who are at risk, which is why we're speaking to you today. The reason that we were very keen to hold the webinar for people working in the property sector is that you guys face particular risks. And what we wanted to do in this session was to raise the importance, because you're so busy with lots and lots of different things. I was talking to Vicky beforehand about all the different pieces of legislation you have to comply with, etc. But safety is absolutely key for everyone at work. So what I want to talk to you about today is the importance of recognizing red flags, which are sometimes more like amber flags. They're maybe not so dramatic, but they can really, signal that somebody can pose a risk of harm either to us or other people that they're living with or working with, etc., or in their lives. So we'll talk about how you can identify risk and prioritise safety for tenants and staff, and also what you can do to help manage some of these situations. So there's lots of things to cover, and this is a whistle-stop tour. So yeah, I'll cover as much as I can. So you probably don't need me to outline this to you if you're doing this job day in, day out, but let's just have a think about why abuse in the property sector is a particular problem. There are real, I guess, obvious reasons why that's the case. So you are going into people's homes, their safe spaces, and everybody likes to feel that they're safe in their own home. So to have a professional enter that can sometimes be threatening for some people. Sometimes you will be having to deliver difficult messages to tenants, and I've spoken to, friends and colleagues working in the property sector, and they've told me very much that is the case, that you're having to tell people about things that are not, you're doing, but you're the messenger. You're having to relay those difficult things that they don't want to hear some of the time as well. There's another element that I think plays a factor here in that you really do require building up that relationship with tenants. So an interaction with them that means that you're a familiar person to them. You may become somebody that's trusted. They may even start to almost think of you as a friend. And the nature of that relationship is quite unique. It's built up consistent and it's over a period of time. Often you will be lone working, and the risks associated with lone working can be substantial, coupled with all the other factors that we're talking about. You're going into someone's home, delivering difficult messages at times, that ongoing relationship. So, in a nutshell, there are lots of reasons why someone working in the property sector can face particular risks. This is really important to us. Obviously, Holly was killed when she was at work. And so, we know through our lived experience that issues that a lot of people face in their lives, that could be as a result of their personal relationships, or it could be as a result of, anything else as well. I'll break down some of the issues relating to domestic violence and stalking and harassment shortly. But these are issues that do not just happen in people's personal lives. They follow them throughout their lives, whatever in whatever workplace or industry that they're involved with. But it's really important to us at Hollie Gazzard Trust to support people in the workplace, because it's not just, something that affects you at home, it's something that affects your ability to work and in actual fact that, the whole workplace culture and performance. And one of the things that we have learned through Holly's case and other cases that we learn on, that, the workplace is such a valuable opportunity really to protect people. And that happens on so many different levels. Your workplace can for some be the only safe space that you have. But particularly with your work going into people's home environments, you're going to be having the opportunity to spot things and see things that very few other people will have the chance to do that. And that's why it's so important that being able to identify these warning signs, these patterns, these abusive behaviours, is something that's taken really, really seriously within the industry. So, this is the title of the webinar. When does an angry or disgruntled client become dangerous? And I am not, going to insult you by talking about some of the situations that you will have come across undoubtedly in your work. My angle with this, based on my experience, and I worked for 8 years on the front line supporting victims of domestic abuse and stalking, is that, and prior to that, I have been a journalist researching the topic of stalking for about 25 years. And what my research has shown me and the research of experts is that violence rarely does come out of nowhere. And what we know about violence is largely it follows patterns of behaviour. So there's a standout study from the University of Gloucestershire, Professor Jane Monckton-Smith, who I'm going to name check. She's a real fan of friend of Hollie Gazzard Trust, hopefully a fan as well. And she's written a number of research papers and a book that really detail some of the warning signs and stages that happen before a homicide is committed. She's identified that there are distinct stages of escalation, and it's really worth reading, her work. But I'm going to quote a study that she did in 2017. So they looked at her, Monckton-Smith and her research team looked at 358 cases where women had been killed by male partners or ex-partners. And they found that in 94% of those cases, there had been stalking behaviours prior to the fatal attack. So there is a link between controlling behaviour with stalking behaviour and serious violence. And what I want to say to you is if you think that just impacts the person that is in the relationship or trying to leave the relationship, you're wrong. I will tell you about some cases later in the webinar where there have been people who haven't been the primary victim in the stalking or abuse, but they have actually been subjected to really serious violence. So what I want to get over is that spotting these patterns of behaviour are a way of protecting not just the people directly involved, but everyone around them, because so many people can be at risk in a case like this. And again, going back to your particular role and the value that you have in your sector because of that role, you are so well placed to spot those signs. And I want to sort of reiterate to you, you don't have the responsibility then to sort everything out. That doesn't sit on your shoulders. What we really want to encourage anyone in your situation to do is spot the signs, be confident in trusting your instinct about spotting those signs, and then flagging them to via your policies and procedures, but also to the appropriate agencies as those policies and procedures would indicate. So I'm just making sure I haven't missed a slide out. No, I haven't. So let's have a talk about patterns that appear low level, but then can really signify that there is a risk of violence. So let's talk about harassment to start off with. This is something that you will be very, very familiar with, I'm sure. I'd be interested in hearing from you at the end, but I'm gathering that harassment is something that is a big problem in the property industry. There have been some reports out by the TUC that have indicated, the level of threat and abuse that anyone working in the property sector experiences is really unacceptable and concerning. But let's have a look at what harassment is, because what I'm passionate about getting over to anyone that I speak to is that the law is there to protect you, and understanding what the law requires is really, really helpful for anyone that's being subjected to this sort of behaviour. So, and again, I'm not delving into the letter of the law in this webinar, as we don't have time to do this. I would in our other training, but this is just to give an overview in a nutshell about what the law says. So harassment is behaviour that is unwanted, and it's behaviour that the perpetrator knows or ought to know is unwanted, and it's behaviour that is repeated as well. So going back to the unwanted element of it, a defence that's frequently used in court is that the person will say, well, I didn't know that the behaviour was unwanted. So therefore, setting boundaries with someone but doing it safely is important when it comes to dealing with harassment. That the offender needs to know or ought to know that the behaviour is unwanted. But the good news is it only needs to be repeated under the Protection from Harassment Act on more than 2 occasions. So the bar for that is actually quite low, but it does need to be proven beyond all reasonable doubt. So harassment, unwanted, repeated behaviours, repeated just on more than 2 occasions. And then the other part of evidencing harassment is the impact that it has. So it's unwanted, repeated behaviours that cause fear, alarm and distress on the person that's receiving them. So I'll come back about the importance of evidencing that in a while, but that's essentially in a nutshell what the law says on harassment. Now let's talk about stalking. So stalking sits under harassment in the legislation. So stalking in the legislation is a type of harassment. But stalking presents a different risk to harassment, and I'll tell you why. So stalking is the same as harassment in that it's unwanted, repeated behaviours. So it's behaviour that only needs to be repeated, and we can prove it beyond all reasonable doubt on 2 occasions, and the perpetrator should know or ought to know that the behaviour is unwanted. But what sets stalking apart from harassment is the mindset of the person doing the behaviour. So stalking is driven by a fixated mindset, fixated thinking, which means someone is ruminating, they're unable to reframe their thinking about something, they have an obsession with somebody or something that they feel that is making them angry and motivating them to behave as they are doing. So, going back to harassment, harassment tends to be about something. So, it could be very much to do with noise, neighbourhood issues, antisocial behaviour. The unwanted repeated behaviour tends to be about a particular thing. If we can remove the thing, which I know in housing terms and rehousing can be incredibly challenging, but if we can remove the thing or remove one of the parties, so the noisy neighbour is removed from the equation, then the problem tends to go away. With stalking, it doesn't, because it's driven by a personal obsession with the person that is being stalked. That's a real important distinction. Sometimes we really confuse stalking and harassment for understandable reasons. But what we're looking for, if we're trying to identify stalking, is four. Think of the mnemonic. Police and the criminal justice agencies now use this to spot stalking and identify it, as opposed to just the general harassment of which loads and loads is reported in. So four, think about that. You're looking for evidence of fixated and obsessive behaviour, fixated and obsessive mindset that is then fueling unwanted and repeated behaviour. So let's have a quick look at the 5 key reasons why people stalk, because stalking can be, really, really overwhelming, and we can focus on what's happening, but let's try and understand why people behave like this. Again, let's go back to some of the things that you need to do in your roles, which might make you particularly susceptible to some of this behaviour. So to start off with, we have a rejected ex-partner, and I must reference where I'm getting this information from. So these typologies of stalking have been produced by a range of experts over the years. And if you'd like to learn more about stalking, I would suggest that you have types of stalking. I would suggest you have a look at the Stalking Risk Profile website, which is, so I've been trained in this as a frontline practitioner, and it has very interesting information about different types of stalking and why people do it. But essentially, let me tell you that the main categories for stalking are as follows. So about half of all stalking cases involve someone who's had an intimate relationship, it's then ended, and the person won't leave their ex-partner alone. So going back to the statistic from Jane Monckton-Smith, ex-partner stalking is high risk, it is associated and linked to homicides. So when you have someone who won't leave their ex-partner alone, and they're driven by an obsession by their ex-partner, and maybe you will see something like this in a housing environment, take note of that and report that. It may appear quite low level, it doesn't necessarily involve violence, but it's that repeated unwanted behaviour that the perpetrator knows or ought to know is unwanted. So rejected ex-partner, those account for about half of all stalking cases. But then we have a whole array of other types of stalker and motivations for doing it. So resentful stalking, and I flag this to you in your role. These are stalkers that are driven by a sense of being a victim of injustice. And they may be right that they have been subjected to injustice, but they deal with that by fixating on a person that they blame for that injustice. And that then leads them to behave in ways that are unwanted and repeated. And rather than getting less angry and reframing their thinking about the injustice, they get more angry, they write more letters, they make more complaints, and it becomes very, very personal. Talk about some case studies that illustrate what this looks like in reality later. The next category is an intimacy seeker stalker. Those are the types of stalkers that you probably think of when you think of a lonely, isolated individual who becomes attached to an individual and gets a real obsession by them, and sometimes is delusional about that connection. So think of films like 1 Hour Photo by Robin Williams. So these stalkers can have mental health illnesses that are making them delusional, but they will very much believe in a lot of cases that there is that relationship that is actually real, and they become absolutely obsessed by the person that they're stalking. Incompetent suitor stalkers, these are individuals who want to have a relationship, a sexual relationship with somebody, but they're not sure how to go about this. So cases that I've come across relating to this would relate to some, thinking of one chap who had a learning disability, which was affecting his ability to communicate the fact that he wanted a relationship with a woman that worked on the reception desk at his dental practice. And he started sending her photos of himself without his top on, telling her that she was beautiful, that he loved her. It was completely inappropriate and ill-judged by him. It frightened her, and she reported him to the police. And the police dealt with it by explaining to him that it was not appropriate to behave like that. It was frightening the woman. It was unwanted behaviour that was having a serious impact on her. He needed to stop. Otherwise, he would be arrested in connection with stalking. That category of stalking is supposed to be one that responds best to interventions. So I just want to say that. And then the last category is predatory stalking. This generally tends to be male offenders, and they are motivated by sexual gratification. So there's a big crossover here with sex offending and this type of stalking, and the behaviour in itself. So you might have following, spying, turning up, sending messages to someone that, again, that's unwanted repeated behavior, but it's driven by a sexual gratification. And sometimes the stalking in itself provides sexual gratification, so the following and spying will provide sexual gratification. But what we know about this type of stalker is that behavior can then escalate into physical violence. So horrible cases where you've had women who've been abducted off the streets. I'm thinking about Sarah Everard as an example, Sabina Nessa. I could go on with lots and lots of examples of appalling cases that have happened. There have been stalking behaviours prior to those attacks as well. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the different reasons why people stalk. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, that in itself is an entire, university course. But it's really important that we understand some of the reasons why people stalk, so that when we encounter behaviours that appear to be driven by an obsession, we can maybe put that into some context, which then helps us try and keep the people affected safe. So it's helpful to know this as well. Going back to the Protection from Harassment Act 1997, and which again is criminal law, so it needs to be proven beyond all reasonable doubt. So very high burden of proof there. What we need to evidence is what has happened beyond all reasonable doubt, that we've had behaviour that's unwanted and repeated. So that could be stuff like text messages, phone calls. It could be someone turning up. So we might have evidence on Ring doorbells, or other doorbells are available. So evidence of what has happened, but we also need evidence on how it has affected the victim. So it's important that you know this if this should happen to you in your working roles, but also it's really important for anyone that you might be working with who might be experiencing stalking or harassment, that they understand that they need to get evidence of what's happening to them, but also evidence of how it's affecting them as well. So let me give you a brief word now about the safety app that was established in Hollie's name, Hollie Guard. So Hollie Guard is helpful for getting evidence retaining evidence of stalking. So HollyGuard is an app. There's a free version to download, but we would encourage anyone that's using it in the workplace to access the paid version because it gives you that extra level of safeguarding. So HollyGuard does two key things, and again, this could be an entire webinar in its own right. And if you're interested in finding more, please drop us an email and we'd be delighted to share it with you. But what HollyGuard Extra does is allow you to log incidents and evidence of how those incidents have impacted you in the app, which is then saved on the cloud and can be downloaded. So if you decide to report to police or if you want to report to your workplace as per your processes and policies, you've got all the evidence in one place that's kept on the app. What HollyGuard Extra also does is with the shake and tap of the device, it connects you to a monitoring centre that is available 24 hours, 7 days a week. It's police approved, and the staff in the monitoring centre are specially trained to help safeguard people so they can speak to people about reassuring them. They can talk to them about accessing a safe space because we have an app which has safe spaces put in the map that's available on the app. Or, if appropriate, it will escalate the incident to emergency services, so police. So what we see frequently is that people might seek reassurance via the app, but then that is ultimately escalated to police because it requires that police response. So it's absolutely key that stalking and harassment are criminal offences that are reported to the police. So the police are the agency to deal with them. But what we do know is that sometimes it can be difficult to get that bigger picture across, which is really essential in understanding the risk in stalking and harassment. And so HollyGuard Extra can certainly help with the reporting and sharing of that information with police as well. So that's a look at HollyGuard Extra and how that can help in a situation where there is stalking or harassment or coercive control or hate crime or antisocial behaviour. What we know about all these offences is they are patterns of behaviour. They can escalate into dramatic incidents, but we want to try and stop the escalation from happening. We want to get much better about identifying patterns of behaviour that appear lower level, because there are so many more intervention opportunities to safeguard people if we can spot things at that lower level before they escalate. So what I'm going to do now is talk through some case studies involving some of the crimes and behaviours that I've been talking about that have come to the attention of the public because they've happened in public places, they've impacted workplaces, and I've picked some cases. Do you know what? I could pick so many cases because this is, a massive problem for us in society. But I've selected some cases that I think translate into the workplace, and your particular workplace, as I would say. So let's start with Hollie, bless her. So Hollie was a hairdresser and she was murdered in her workplace back in 2014, as I said at the outset. So Hollie had been abused by her partner during the relationship. And it started off, as most of them do, she loved him. He was really kind, attentive. He loved her. He told her he made her feel really special. He bought her presents. He bought her a car, which was really wonderful for someone who was only 19. But that then meant that he could dictate where she went, who she went with, what she did, because it was his car. So that was quite clever of him. And he used various different means to get Hollie to do what he wanted. So sometimes it would be being lovely to her. Sometimes he'd make her feel really sorry for him because he didn't have a lot of friends. He didn't have a big support network. He had lots of problems with his mental health and substance abuse. And he made Hollie feel that she was the only person who understood that, and she really needed to help him because without her, he was on his own. He also made attempts to harm himself as well. So he used lots of different tactics to keep Hollie under his clutches, really. And he didn't like her spending time with family and friends, and they started to sort of lose touch with her a little bit, and they could see that she was changing. but she didn't really want to talk to them about what was happening in the relationship. You know, she was 20, she was a really proud and independent and intelligent and dynamic young woman. She didn't want to talk to her parents, and probably didn't want to admit that the choice of her partner wasn't a good one and it wasn't working out for her. But they could see it, but they had no idea the risk that he posed to her. So she kept trying to get away from him. And this is really common in domestic abuse situations. There's a statistic, I think, by Refuge that says that people will try to end abusive relationships 7 times on average before they finally make the break. And some never are able to do that because they get coerced back into resuming the relationship. Often it takes a particular incident that makes someone think, right, I've reached the end of my tether here. I do need to end the relationship. And what happened with Hollie was when she tried she'd got to the stage where she really wanted to end the relationship with him because his behavior was just becoming really controlling and smothering her. And she needed to get away from him. So she met him in a public place, and he didn't take the news that she was finishing with him well. He threw water in her face. He nicked her bank card, stole all her money out of her account. And at that point, that's when she reported him to police. That's when she wanted to get help. She needed her parents to support her. She didn't want the relationship to continue. And at that point, people could then help her. And so they did. She reported to police. He was what arrest sort of his warrant was put out for his arrest in connection with the theft of the bank card, but the bigger picture wasn't really understood, and the risk that she faced because of all the history of control and the fact he'd now lost control, and because he was fixated and obsessed by her, which wasn't really understood by those around her. The risk that he posed because he was a stalker at that stage was not understood. And so Hollie went to work as usual on the Tuesday after she'd ended the relationship. And he waited, and he entered the salon and he killed her. He stabbed her in front of everyone that was present. So Hollie's family really are passionate about workplaces understanding the risk of a controlling relationship and also stalking when it ends, because there were so many people that were impacted in Hollie's murder. Obviously, there was Hollie, there was her family, there were her friends, but there were the people that were present. There were clients in the salon. The ripples of what happened that day continue to impact so many lives. I can't stress to you. So again, the lessons learned there, it's identifying the risk associated not just with violent behavior, but with controlling behavior, spotting those warning signs about someone who is not free to go where they want, with whom they like to go. Maybe they're being controlled about their clothing, about their appearance, their phone. Hollie was always getting messages from him, checking where she was, what she was doing, who she was doing it with. And research has shown that violence is a byproduct of that controlling behavior. When someone loses control, as they do when they end a relationship, the risk that they pose to the victim but others around them escalates significantly. This is another case that has resulted in a homicide as well. And the victim of the homicide was not the person that was being directly stalked, if you like, but it shows how stalking can impact other people around the primary victim. So this is a picture of Cassie Hayes, and she was killed at work. So she was a travel agent and she was working in Southport. Now, her partner was being stalked by her ex-partner. So Cassie was in a relationship with a woman. The woman had ended a relationship with a man who was stalking her. And we know that because he'd appeared in court charged with harassment of his ex-partner. Now, the day after he appeared in court, he walked into Cassie's workplace, armed with a knife, and he killed her whilst she was serving a family who were buying a holiday. And he was very open about why he'd done it. Basically, he'd been pushed to doing that because he'd lost his relationship with his partner, who was now with Cassie. She'd left him for Cassie, and he felt that he had no choice take the situation in his own hands. And the motivation behind this type of stalking is to either get the partner to resume the relationship, and when you've lost hope of getting that relationship resumed, you can then focus on punishing the person for ending that relationship. And so we've got a clear picture here of someone, and he was very open about it after he'd done it, was that he wanted to punish his ex for ending that relationship and punish Cassie as well, because she was now with his partner, his ex-partner. So again, understanding the bigger picture when we identify stalking behaviours is really important. And that does not sit with you in your jobs, but it's an illustration of why it's so important that we flag it if we come across behaviours that are fixated, obsessive, unwanted and repeated. And that could be someone telling you about their ex-partner, that they're very angry about the relationship ending, or it could be someone who's being subjected to that behaviours by their ex-partner, or it could be their partner's ex-partner, or whatever the situation might be. So you can see that the risk in domestic abuse situations is complicated, and other people can certainly get caught in the crossfire, literally sometimes. So again, none of this needs to sit just on your shoulders. It's about sharing that information, spotting those early warning signs and flagging them. Another case study, which you may be familiar with working in your industry, is the case of Susie Lamplugh, who was an estate agent. So she worked in the property industry. Now, there have been many different theories about what happened to Susie, because her body has never been found and she disappeared 40 years ago this year. So the case is worth looking into because it provides lots of learning for us around lone working and the risks associated with that, and the importance of having practices that protect people when they are lone working. But having spoken to Susie's mum, who's now passed away, Diana Lamplugh, who was absolutely amazing, she firmly believed that Susie was stalked. And that she had been abducted by the man who stalked her. That man has since died. He was in prison serving life sentences for offences against other women. But there's a fair bit of evidence to suggest that potentially Susie had had some kind of relationship with him, and he had tricked her into turning up at a property, booking a viewing. And this man was somebody who had a track record of stalking women, who worked as estate agents and loan worked in other ways, stalking professional women. So there were lots of clues, if you like, around Susie's disappearance that do suggest to this that this man may have been responsible. But she said that she was turning up to give someone called Mr. Kipper a viewing of a property, and she didn't turn. She wasn't ever seen again since. So again, there's so much learning around that case, around the importance of checking in, of loan work devices, whatever those may be. I just bring this example to your attention as well. So this is a case that happened in the health sector, but it's an illustration of a resentful stalking case. So this was a dentist who gave some treatment to somebody and the patient was really unhappy with the treatment. He became obsessed and fixated by the idea that the treatment he'd been given by the dentist was poisoning him, and it was having a serious effect on his life, on his body, on his ability to live. And he became incredibly angry with the dentist. Now, he complained to the dentist, and the dentist tried to satisfy his complaint, tried to rectify it, but the client was not happy about it at all. The dentist followed all his procedures, all his complaints procedures. He got a second opinion in. Nothing would make this guy satisfied. And so he had to then say, well, I've done everything I can to help you. I'm really sorry. And then he expected a complaint to come in. None came. Anyway, 4 years after he last saw the patient. Somebody was driving past his house, the dentist's house, and noticed that there was an individual sitting in a balaclava in a vehicle at the bottom of his drive. The police were called, and it transpired that the man in the balaclava was the patient. And he, over the past 4 years, fueled by his fixated thinking towards the anger towards the dentist and the fact that he felt that the treatment he'd been given had ruined his life, etc. That had then driven him to stalk the dentist for 4 years. He'd researched everything about him. He'd hired or bought a number of vehicles so he could follow him undetected. He'd tracked the dentist to speaking engagements and conferences that he'd been attended. He'd found out about where his family lived. He'd even been hiding out in the dentist's outbuildings on his property so he could spy on him, and he was keeping military logs of the dentist's movements. So absolutely horrendous case. And what the police discovered when they opened the vehicle that the man was sitting in was that there was a crossbow in the boot of the car. There was essentially a murder kit, as was described during the case, and there was chloroform in there. Cable ties. He'd got a document together about his plans to harm the dentist, and the interior of the vehicle was covered in plastic sheeting. So it was absolutely terrifying for the dentist to realise what had been happening because he had no idea. It's a really extreme case. However, it really indicates how, when you're looking at what some of the reasons are that people stalk other people, that resentment is something that is a real factor in some of the stalking cases that are out there. And they're not just in the films, they do happen, for real. That one, and I've spoken to the victim in the case. It is like something out of a film, but it very much happened with him, and it's something that he lives with to this day. So there are some case studies that I have illustrated. So let's break down, because all this is concerning to think about. And what I want to reassure everyone that I speak to, about these issues are, it is not your responsibility to deal with this on your own. And in actual fact, sharing information is the best way that we can try and mitigate the risk of really bad things happening. So number one, which is where you are so well placed to have input, is about the identification of these behaviours. And what I say to people is, trust your instinct. As a human, we all have instincts, survival instincts, mothering instincts, fathering instincts, whatever they might be. And if something doesn't feel right with you about someone's behaviour, take notice of it. It sounds a really trivial thing to say, especially when we're so busy and something does appear quite trivial. But when you look at the serious case reviews, domestic homicide reviews that have been carried out after something catastrophic has happened, what you will see in all of these cases were that there were little warning signs much, much earlier along. And if we had taken notice of them and we, collated those and not worked in silos, then we would have been best placed to really understand the risk that we are facing when it comes to a particular individual. So we can't carry out risk assessment and understanding who's in danger if we don't have that bigger picture. And so in the cases that I've illustrated today, each agency, each individual, anyone that comes across the perpetrator will have information that is absolutely essential to carrying out a proper risk assessment. So once we've done that, then the powers that be, the appropriate agencies, and anyone responsible for supporting those at risk can help put things in place to keep them safe. Because, putting together a safety plan has to be absolutely holistic, and it has to cover all elements of a victim's life. So that is going to include where they live, their home, the journey from their home to their work or their college or wherever it is that they're going, a workplace safety plan, a social safety plan, a safety plan for them when they're using their devices and they're online as well, a safety plan involving their finances. All there's a huge element that needs to be taken in when we're looking at safeguarding, and we have to work together in order to make sure that someone is safe. It's no use just having a safety plan at work if that doesn't apply when they're home or when they're out socialising. Everyone around people who are at risk need to be part of that plan and about keeping them safe. And then the key thing that I'm absolutely passionate about as someone who has worked as an advocate for victims of crime is that it's so important that anyone who is at risk of these types of behaviours understands their rights under the law and what the law actually says, because there is so much that the law can do to protect people, so much. But what I have found from my time on the front line is that most people don't know what the law says, and they don't know the things that they could do that would massively help the law to protect them. So I come back to Hollie Guard Extra, the importance of logging that evidence, understanding what evidence of stalking or harassment or hate crime or antisocial behaviour is, and how important it is that we get evidence of what is happening, but also how it is affecting us as well, how it's impacting us. Those things are so important. There are a number of pieces of legislation that cover these whole areas as well. And, I don't sort of have time, and also it's probably not the best use of our time to go through each piece of legislation that relates to this. But here are some key bits of law that we've pulled out. So you've got the Protection from Harassment Act at the bottom, but then there's also the Domestic Abuse Act as well that comes in. But one of the things that I want to flag as well is that when you go to work, you do not go to work to be abused, to be subjected to abuse, or to be abused. And I know that so many of you will develop a real sort of relationship with the tenants that you're working with. That's so important to you, and they'll tell you things because, as we said at the start of the webinar, that the relationships that you have, the working relationships, are quite unique in your roles. But that does not mean as a professional that you have to put up with abusive behaviour. It absolutely doesn't. And there is so much legislation that is there to protect you when you go about your work. The Worker Protection Act says that it's the responsibility of the employee to ensure that of the employer to ensure that their staff are not subjected to harassment. They have to take all reasonable steps to make sure that their staff are safe and protected from harassment. So it's so important that you just bear that in mind when you're going about your work, because it's not just about the clients that you will be meeting, the tenants. It's also about yourselves as well, and you do not go to work to be on the receiving end of abuse. So what I will do quickly now is just explain some of the things that Hollie Gazzard Trust does, and then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions at the end. I've been busy chattering away, and I can see it's 10 to 1. So when we go into schools, colleges and workplaces to speak to young people about the warning signs of abusive behaviour, about the importance of being allies, of creating that zero tolerance environment to low level behaviours, because I've spoken to you today about some horrendous cases that have culminated in catastrophe. How do we stop those things from happening? We stop those things from happening by creating an environment where abusive behaviour is the extreme, that it's not acceptable, and so it stands out. If we are creating cultures and environments where low level behaviours abusive behaviours, offensive behaviours, harmful behaviours are just tolerated and no one does anything about it. That's extremely validating for the minority of people who then go on to commit really serious acts of abuse and violence. So that's what we do with all our training. So we, as I say, work with young people in educational environments, but because of what happened to Holly happened at work, it's very much of our remit to work with workplaces as well. So we offer a range of training programs for workplaces that cover all manner of abusive behaviours and how workplaces can create safer environments for everyone. So that means that not only can they flourish, but when we do have the minority who may carry out abusive behaviours, then we know how we can deal with those. So recently we have refreshed our training and we're now offering a range of digital toolkits. So we know that there is a big demand from workplaces to be able to access high quality training as and when fits into your schedules. And so we've pulled together a range of subjects. So we've got them there: stalking in the workplace, coercive controlling behaviour, active bystander, which I love that training. It's basically about creating environments and workplaces where the culture creates zero tolerance to abusive behaviours. And we have an offering on lone working as well. So we also have other in-person training as well. So some of the same topics that we cover in face-to-face training, we tailor that for individual organisations depending on what their needs are. So they might have had specific issues that they're facing, there are specific concerns, and we can tailor what we offer according to each individual client, and those are hugely popular as well. We also have a special training session which is delivered by Hollie's dad, Nick Gazzard, which is really, really special because it combines his personal experience with what he's learned in the 12 years since her murder about workplace safety and all the other things as well. Here are some testimonies from the different audiences that we deliver our training to. So as I say, we deliver training in education settings to young people, which is just central to what we do. And we get such fantastic responses. We're doing some amazing work with young men, which is just brilliant. We love it so much because we really do believe that, encouraging young boys and men to show leadership around all these subjects, is so important for them. And then it's also helpful for women and girls as well. So that work is hugely, hugely important. And we talk about gender stereotyping with young men and how that's unhelpful to them, puts lots of pressure on them. We talk about misogyny, delivering those sessions to a wide range of different cohorts, some elite sports stars, and then some individuals who've maybe presented to their schools as having problematic behaviours. So all ranges. Just flick through those. Right, okay. So Vicky, I don't know if you're there. We don't have loads of time for questions. I've whizzed through a lot. It's a lot of content, so I don't know if people have questions or comments or what have you, but if you
Sorry, excuse
do,
me.
fire away.
We haven't got any questions there yet. I'll just give it a moment in case anyone is in the process of asking a question. If anyone does have any, then please put them in the Q&A box now and we will try to get through them. Otherwise, the Hollie Gazzard Trust contact details are on the screen now on Jane's slide. So if anyone would like to get in touch directly, please feel free to do so. The webinar has also been recorded, as I mentioned earlier. So if anyone would like to, rewatch to go back over anything that Jane's discussed, you'll be able to do that. I think we've just got one question. Oh, no, just someone saying thank you, Vicky. Yeah, you're welcome, Vicky. Okay, I think we can finish up there then if there's no questions to come in. Thank you, Jane, so much for your time and presenting today. That was really, really useful and really interesting. Hopefully, I think that will help quite a lot of people to get these things in place and hopefully get in touch with you to discuss the app and how they can sort of use those things in practice. Thank you everyone for joining us and listening today. As I mentioned, if you've got any questions, please feel free to get in touch with myself or with the Hollie Gazzard Trust directly. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us and have a good day. I'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.